this is Gilgamesh. I want to talk about this movie. I have a review of it, but I want to go further into what makes this movie so good. Well, for one, it's the dog Indy. He is the star of this movie. And you listen to interviews with Ben Liedenberg. Yeah. He talks about how he got the idea from Poltergeist. Imagine Poltergeist from the dog point of view of a golden retriever. That's where, and it stuck with him. And so when you see and the whole thing is, like the beginning of this movie, I'm going to go into like the movie itself and explain what I think is going on with Todd. And, just like his grandfather, he has a hereditary lung disease in the movie. And what the entity in the movie that is after Todd, I think what it is, and I'm probably right about it, and there is a golden retriever in the movie, but when they were filming, they didn't have the dog on set with Indy. They filmed those scenes separately, because if you ever try to work with animals, dogs, it's kind of like two dogs are not going to be able to just, they're going to be wanting to play and everything. They're not going to be focused on, doing the movie. And Indy doesn't know he's in a movie, as Ben said. So they have a little stuffed animal standing so they can show him, okay, this is where the dog's going to be in the movie. And all that footage of Indy as a puppy and everything, that's Ben himself. And you can see where, Ben's clearly playing the part of Todd. And it is Todd doing all of his own doing the dialogue. But there's scenes where you can tell it's clearly Ben, especially when they show Indy as a puppy and everything, and you see his wife come in, and they cut out, like here. You can see that's Kari, and yeah. And so, beginning this movie, we have Indy's asleep on, and it's in New York City. That's, where the movie starts. And the phone goes off, is ringing, and you hear it vibrate, and Indy looks around, and and then what it is, Vera. Vera is Todd's sister. She's worried about him, and she's calling, and, Indy notices, you can see Todd, and obviously he has blood pouring out of his nose. Indy's not sure what's going on, and it looks like Todd's having a seizure. And he is, blood's coming out. You can see it on the phone, and his sister opened the door, and she realized something's wrong. He calls 911, and then next we see the beginning with Indy as a puppy and everything. Those scenes are with Ben, because Indy's his dog. And I believe when you see after Todd leaves the hospital, I do believe in a distance, if you look carefully, Ben has a beard. I know that later we see Todd, he has a beard, but I think this is actually Ben walking at the distance from the hospital. And all those scenes are clearly, I think, might be, because Ben actually has somewhat hair that could look a bit long on the side. I think those things are all of Ben and Indy. Because remember, this is his dog. And so, next thing we see Indy in the car, and Todd's at his grandfather's place. His grandfather died. Played by Larry Fassbender, who doesn't, he's always been a good actor. And so yeah, and Indy's in the car. And this is the first time he looks back as Todd's outside talking to his sister and trying to open the gate so they can get to the cottage, as they call it. And he looks back and he sees this present. The first time we get the sense of this presence. And Todd, hasn't coughed or anything. He's actually seems to be doing pretty well. His treatment seems to have worked to deal with his lung infection. And so they get to the house, and basically he, coaxes Indy out of the car, and Indy knows something's up with this place. And throughout it, you get the sense that, we find out that Bandit was. Oh yeah, I brought up that their grandfather had many dogs, and Bandit was one of them. He was the last one. They said a lot of them ran away from home, and we later find out what happened to Bandit. But the whole thing is, that um, yeah, and we watch Indy noticing, and this is the thing about animal dogs and cats. They'll look off in the corner and everything, and they'll notice stuff, and they'll start growling or they'll bark, and people wonder what the fuck are they looking at? It's because animals see things differently than we do, and that's why I'll explain what I think this entity is, and it fits into the end of the movie, and it plays in the idea of we can't see what it is until it's ready to show itself, and that plays into what happens at the end of the movie. And essentially what happened to Grandfather and Bandit. Remember, dogs are very loyal and protective of their owners. And so, yeah. And this entity is after Todd. He's sick, and the weaker he gets, the stronger this entity gets. Plain to what I think the entity is. I could be wrong, but I think it isn't a ghost. This is not a ghost in the sense of like, oh, it's a haunted house in that sense. It's the presence. This presence is there for Todd, and it will take out, if it has to, take Indy out to make sure it can get to Todd. So that's, so and Todd's condition does get worse, and he gets frustrated, like anybody sick would get frustrated, even with Indy never takes anything personal. It's how dogs are. Like when Todd gets angry and tells him get the fuck out off the bed, Indy just sit and looks at him. And when they go walking, Indy, sits still, and then this hunter comes up, and he's obviously a very friendly dog, and the hunter, you don't see his face. Dogs don't tend to see a human's face, especially when they're that low to the ground. They look up. They can't tell what you look like. They know what you sound like and what you smell like, and your body language. But for the most part, they don't, when they're looking up, they don't see your face. And this is actually true of dogs. They have they can see colors, but they're more muted than human eyes, like cats. Their spectrum of color is different, and this is actually true. So, yeah. And Indy's just, he senses this presence, which only animals seem, and it brings up something I think what this entity is. I think it's actually death. Well, think about it. In Final Destination, you never see death. You only see, like, when it wants, that it's going to kill. Here, Indy senses it. And it doesn't want to be noticed. That's why it targets Indy like it did Bandit, because they're the ones that can try to stop it and alert their owner until it's ready to show itself to Todd. And the grandfather, it's like when they're at their weakest. And so this thing, it stalks to get rid of the dogs. And because the dogs are it's, in its way of getting what it wants, which is to take the soul. Yeah. And that shows, why it killed Bandit. Yes, Bandit gets killed in the movie. We don't see his death. We hear, at one point, Indy sees a bandana, which Bandit wears, and we do see Bandit's body. We see the bandana around his neck. His skeletal remains. So yeah, he was killed. But he sees this, and he gets under an armoire, which is where people put their clothes, and he goes to, and he touches it, and then he sees what happened to and then he sees bandana hit the ground. It's covered in blood, and he sort of backs up, and knowing what killed that Bandit was killed before Grandpa was taken. Yeah. So that's why I think this is death, and because it takes more of a presence of a man than of anything else. It's the only thing, and it can sort of, Bandit the Indy sees the eyes of the thing and take any form, which death can take any form it wants. So what we get by the end of the movie is that Todd tells Indy to wait in this room. The door closes. He's locked. He can't, and he disobeys Todd. So what does Todd, you can tell he's not doing well. His health is deteriorating. He tried to get, he goes to the hospital, He goes for obviously a treatment. He comes back and he's got a bandage and it starts bleeding. And oh yeah, he goes to give Indy a bath after he can't find the dog, and this presence took him, but he didn't kill Indy. It covered him, whatever it was, this muck or whatever. So he's giving him a bath. He sneezes, it coughs up blood. I mean, all over Indy and everything. But then Todd goes to the with Indy to after this whole thing, goes to the hospital. He finds out that his condition has gone so bad he can't get in this trial. He gets mad. They go home. And basically, the thing separates. This presence, which I think is death, separates by closing the door on Indy. Indy disobeys and gets outside, trying to get help, and gets caught in a snare. And then I think Todd finds him. I think it's Todd. You really can't tell what it is that finds Indy when he's in this fox snare. And he basically gets chained outside because Todd's pissed him for disobeying him. And basically Indy sits out there in the rain. It starts raining. And is looking up, and Todd's condition's worse. You can hear him cough and cough. And at that point, you suddenly stop hearing any sound coming up there. Well, that plays into the end of the movie. And eventually this thing tries to get rid of Indy. And Indy fights it, struggles with it, and eventually runs in, breaks itself free. It's still at the chain around a second, and then what happens is the basement opens. I think this is Bandit helping him to get in to try to help Todd. And so you see Bandit's body. His skeletal remains. He gets in, gets up the stairs, and then Todd hears a noise, and he gets the lantern, he turns on, and he knows something's in the house. Yeah. There's a point where Todd grabs Indy, brings him to the bed, where this is where I think he's close to dying, because he can now sense this presence, which I think is death, and he's going, who is that? And eventually, like I said, he and Indy get separated, then Indy comes back upstairs, he does this, turns on, because the thing hates the light. It hates the light. Like light showing, kind of makes it so that it has to go away. So then Indy comes in and he puts, grabs Indy and then puts him on the bed, and Indy looks back, and then Todd goes, well, why would he? And that's when we finally see what Todd looks like. Yeah, the actor playing Todd, and he looks and he sees his body. So this is when the thing comes for him, and that's why I think it's death. It's dragging him in the basement. Indy falls after and tries to pull him back, and then basically there's Indy. He's growling, barking, making a sound at the entity that's coming for Todd, and then Todd realizes what's going on. He's dead. And so he tells Indy, you're a good dog, and you can't save me. And he accepts his fate to protect Indy. He doesn't want Indy dying. He gets what happened, that by accepting that he's dead, the thing's going to take his soul, which is why I think this is death, and he leaves Indy alone. And Indy looks around, he sits, and then Vera he sits where, at the stairs looking up, and then he sits where, in the basement, looking at the hole where Todd was taken away. And then we see it open, and that's when Vera notices Bandit's body, his corpse. The skeleton remains and sees the bandana, and then Indy shows up, and he sits there for a minute, looks, and then he goes upstairs. And they drive off in a car, and it's showing it from Indy. And this movie was filmed at Indy's perspective. So I think that's what this is. And it's much more fascinating of a movie. It's not particularly, it has a jump scare when the entity tries to get to Indy. I jumped for the first time watching that, because I forgot the timing. It was so good when the hand comes up to grab Indy. It's like, you forgot that was going to happen. I just watched it before and forgot that happened. And so, yeah. And then, Indy goes, of course, to live with Vera. But the reason I think it's death is because Todd's dying. Throughout the whole, his illness is getting worse, just like with his grandfather. I think his grandfather realizes by coming to this cabin in the woods, he's basically, his illness he thought would get better going out there. Todd thought it would be great to get away from the city. It would help his lung disease, but it just made it worse as he went on. And that's because the presence job is to take your soul. So it has to weaken Todd and make him sicker and sicker so that there's no way to save him. And no, Indy can't save him. That's why he says at the end, "You're a good dog, you can't save me." Because he accepts that he's dead. And that's the heartbreaking thing for Indy, because he doesn't understand what's going on. He does notice Todd's body, but he doesn't, like all dogs see things that we don't see. That's why he sees Todd's spirit and it drags away. Death is there to take Todd to where he's supposed to go. And Todd's afraid. He screams and Indy fights, and then he accepts. He knows exactly what's going on. This thing's going to kill Indy if Todd doesn't accept that he's dead and just die and go with it. So that's why he accepts and dies, and what's left of him turns into a skeleton. That's what I think this thing represents. It's not a normal haunted house. I think this is like, for this movie, I think that this is death. And it's come for Todd because it knows he's dying. That's how I'm interpreting it. I could be wrong that the presence is, death itself, because it seems like, it doesn't want the living to see it. That's why it only shows itself to Indy and to when you're dead, or right before you die. You can sense it before you die, and that's why Todd dies shortly after when he chains Indy outside. You already tell his health is deteriorating, goes up, and you can hear him slowly, the coughing's getting to the point, and then suddenly you don't hear anything. So it's obvious he had died. His body was so weak, you could tell he could barely stand and everything. I mean, he was gonna die. And this thing, and he doesn't know he's dead till he sees his body and realizes, oh, he died in his sleep. So he died peacefully, but his spirit is still there until he accepts that he's dead and moves on. Indy's left wondering what the hell just happened. He's looking around like, what? Yeah. And throughout the movie, he can hear Bandit. And he hears the horror of Bandit in the basement. That's why he can tell Bandit tried to get out of the basement. He was killed down there by this entity that basically wanted to keep him away from his owner, Todd and Vera's grandfather, who, admits he made a mistake coming into this cabin, because this is where death exists in this. You can see there's an access point for death to get through, to come for you. If you come here and you're sick, you're going to die. So that's why I think it is death. I said, I might be wrong about that, but the fact that Todd doesn't know he died until even when he sees it, he's in shock that that's his body and that he died, and then death puts a chain around his neck and drags him down to take him to the afterlife, but he screams, and then Indy tries him, and only when he realizes the truth that he accepts that he's dead, and he says, "You're a good dog, you can't save me." And he gives up the ghost, and he died. His spirit moves on. So that's why I think we are dealing with death itself. And that's what's fascinating about the movie. And from a dog's point of view, he doesn't understand this whole thing of, that's why he looks around, he wonders, he sees Bandit's body. He doesn't know what this means. And that's why he waits for Todd to come back until Vera opens the basement, and then he sees her, and he realizes by the end, Todd's gone. And that's why he goes up the stairs and leaves with Vera in the vehicle, and you can tell he's processing that Todd died. Even though, it's obvious he knew Todd was dead, but he couldn't accept it till that moment. At the end, when Todd's gone, he's sitting there for a while, and he finally realized, it's over. Todd's dead. He's moved on. It's ultimately why he leaves with Vera and leaves the cabin. And she's never going to live there, because this is where you go to die. It's like when people they know there's no way to save them. They want to get as far away from people. This cabin, I think, their grandfather's cabin represents. And you hear it in their grandfather talk about that this has happened to other members of the family. He's the latest one. I think it only happens to males. They come here to die. That's why and Todd is like the last male in the family, I think. Or maybe I did think he mentioned a brother and said he loves his taxidermy, but he left everything else to Todd. But I think by leaving the cabin, he knew that this hereditary disease was going to affect Todd, and he was the casualty. Doesn't seem like the women are affected by it. I think it's only the men, because his sister never gets it, and she seems very fine and healthy. But men seem to catch this from the grandfather and Todd, that this is passed on through the family. And so and Todd is the latest victim of this lung disease that probably kills all the males in the family. And we don't know when he made the video of his last will and testament that he left everything to Todd and his taxidermy to his brother. But so that pretty much, like I said, the dog doesn't know he's in a movie, and I have watched all the behind the scenes. Oh yeah, if you sit through the movie in theaters, when you see this, they do give you behind the scenes how they filmed. Not a long one, but they show you some of the scenes how they filmed them, and it's really interesting to see. It's very funny hearing them talk about how Indy doesn't know he's in a movie, and he doesn't. And he's just he's a better actor than Dwayne Johnson. And he's not even acting. He's just being a dog who takes cues and everything and looks around. And like all dogs, he, sees things that people don't see. And I think that's why death, I do think this is death. I might be completely wrong. Somebody else could go, no, you're wrong. This isn't death. But I think it is. I think it's death, and he's come for this place is where death, it's like probably there's other places where death comes through. But this, as you see, he comes, there's a hole in there where he takes the soul to the afterlife, and this is where he can come through. But he's blocking everything, and as long as before you die, you can sense him, but you can't really see him, and until you're ready to die. And so that's why when Indy looks up and he sees that isn't Todd, he realizes death, what that is, and he goes trying to. So and so. It's fascinating how they did this movie. I find watching it, more and more I watched it, the more I enjoyed the movie. And it's really the actors in it, for as little dialogue as we get. Indy does a great job of carrying this movie and having the camera behind. There are a couple of shots where they are above, like there's one where it's above him. But most of the shots are done at his level, like from behind. We follow him, like where he walks in the house, or like the camera comes up like this when he sits up at the bottom, at the top of the stairs. But it's mainly from his level, so that you're following and seeing what the dog sees, like he's and looking down, and the camera is at his level, and you're seeing exactly something down there. He sees something moving, and I think that it's just death. And he can take many forms to, get to you, and that's what he shows, that he can split himself up. But I think mainly this is death, wanting Todd because he knows he's going to die. And this cabin is, if you come here, you only come here if you're going to die. And so I think that's why the grandfather, I think, every man that went there knew they were sick, and they felt this was the place where they thought they'd be more comfortable than being in the city. And, they would be less bothered with, and I think Todd knew that he was never going to be treated. I think he got angry when he couldn't get into the, become a test subject, see if there was anything to save him. But I think he came to realize by the end, he was going to die. But, and the dog is a fantastic actor without knowing he's acting. And he gives, as they said, they give him cues, and he looks around, tell him where to look, and they, it's a fascinating behind the scenes how in the interviews that Ben gives, you can tell the time, 3 years they took to make this, all because he wanted to make a movie with a ghost haunted house movie from a dog's point of view, and it works. And I see more and more people seeing it, and it's good because this is a fantastic movie. I just want to go a little more in that and give my opinion of what I think is this movie, what the entity is. I think it is death. I might be wrong, but when Todd dies, it really, is trying to get his soul, and that would be something. Think about Final Destination. You never see death, but you see the traces of him. Todd can't, towards the end of the movie, he can't sense anything. Only Indy can, because animals are more in tune with everything. Humans aren't. That's why Todd goes, there's nothing out there yet. Indy knows death's out there. And the way it touches, yeah, I believe it is death. The fact that when he gets touched, he thinks that's death. And there's a point where he sees Todd, the outline of Todd, and then suddenly he sees death. It's because he knows Todd's going to die. And nothing he does can save Todd. He tries, and yet Todd, when he notices Todd's body in the bed. That's why Todd lifts the lantern and then sees his body, because Indy sits down knowing that is Todd's body, and he's looking at his spirit, and then gets dragged away by death, and then he tries to save him, and then Todd accepts his fate so Indy doesn't get killed by death, and he dies. And you can see that when you see the skin, everything come off his bones and everything, they turn black. And then his skeleton turns black as his skin melts away, and he's dead, and his soul's been taken. It's been reaped by the Grim Reaper. That's exactly what I think it is. So, yeah, I just wanted to cover that. I love this movie. I've seen it 3 times. It's, it is a really good, fantastic horror movie from the point of view of a dog. Yes, that's why I recommend it. It's well made. I don't think it was that expensive made, and it's already, I think it may have already turned a profit. So it's definitely a low budget movie. So, yeah. Well, this is Gilgamesh. I will talk to you later. Bye.